our ancestors survived with herbal medicine and food. So our DNA understands these very well. If we can go into our ancestral medicine and find one or two very specific plants our ancestors used, we might find some very profound healing that we couldn't have found otherwise.
Hello and welcome to Nourish. My name is Kasha and I'm a health and wellness entrepreneur and student of Taoism and Chinese medicine. On this podcast, I share the stories and tools from Type A high achievers who have discovered that elusive state of balance between success and fostering connection, purpose, and inner awareness. Think yin and yang in flow. Now, I speak from experience when I share that I know firsthand how difficult it can be to integrate the two. I'm a Type A Capricorn who spent 11 years ruthlessly climbing the ladder of success in Silicon Valley. But for me, hustling without balance just led to burnout. We need to nourish ourselves proactively. I hope this podcast offers you inspiration on ways to do just that, so you can live the life of your dreams. Now let's jump into it. Hello and welcome back to Nourish. I have such an exciting guest for you all today. I am speaking with the wonderful Laura Ash. She is a clinical herbalist, triple Scorpio, queer woman, dancer, storyteller, and social entrepreneur. She is the owner of the renowned Scarlet Sage in San Francisco, and she is now the founder of Land of Verse, which is an online educational platform that teaches ancient healing arts such as herbalism, tarot, and so much more. We are going to get into so much on today's episode. We're going to talk about the different lineages of herbalism. We're going to talk about how clinical herbalists think in terms of treatment plans for folks. We're going to dive into ways that herbalism can be a complement to Western allopathic medicine. And we're also going to talk about what it's like being a solo entrepreneur, a solo funded entrepreneur, since Laura just got accepted into New Chip Accelerator, and what it looks like to be introducing a concept that is at the intersection of both tech and slightly more esoteric concepts such as the ancient healing arts. So there's a lot to get into it. So excited to dive right in. And without further ado, let's welcome Laura Ash to the podcast. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
I am so excited to have you here. We have a lot to cover, but before we dive into all of it, I want to kick it off with a question that I ask every guest. And that question is, what are 3 words, non-work related, or they can be work related, you can actually call it out, but what are 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
That's a great question. 3 words I would use to describe myself are fun, fast, they might be 3 Fs, and passionate, not 3 Fs. Fun, fast, and passionate.
I love that. So we don't ask every guest this, but because you are a clinical herbalist and we're going to get all into that, I do want to ask you, if you were a plant or an herb, herbs are plants, what plant would you be?
It's also a great question. My favorite herb is lavender, so I often think of that as sort of lavender as my embodiment as a plant, because it's definitely one of my allies and my biggest pull into the world of herbalism from the time I was 19. But today I'm feeling more like a mushroom.
Ooh.
Maybe like a turkey tail that grows on the side of a bay tree and the woods, and feeling that change of season, that cold, kind of that slower time of year, even though I know I'm a fast person. So maybe a turkey tail.
Well, you know what, though? I love that answer, because a huge part of herbalism and just being in touch with plant life in general requires being in tune with nature. So I think that's a very appropriate answer, actually, which is what I would expect, of course, from you, because Laura, I know you're a clinical herbalist, triple Scorpio, a queer woman, dancer, storyteller, and social entrepreneur. There's so much to get into this. into on this podcast. You're the owner of the renowned Scarlet Sage Co. and SF, which I have visited so many times. And you're now the founder of Land of Verse, which is an educational platform that teaches ancient healing arts, herbalism, tarot, and so much more. You started to talk about it just a second ago. You mentioned that lavender was kind of your entry plant into herbalism in a way, but I'm so curious, what exactly launched this path in herbalism? Where did it start?
A lot of people ask me that question, and I think it's a really good one because it reminds me that this path is not linear and not obvious for most humans on the planet of like, why herbalism? There's so many other journeys to go on. But I was sick a lot as a kid and grew up in a very typical white conservative household in the United States in Northern California. My dad's a forester. And, we had plenty of Advil and Diet Pepsi as our herbs of the month in our household. So I didn't have this foundation of herbalism growing up, which actually a lot of people who come into our programs have some sort of connection with herbs. Actually, I would say it's about 50-50. But I was sick a lot as a kid. I had pneumonia the first time when I was 6 weeks old, again when I was 2 years old. And then I remember every year growing up having some lung condition. And I was 19 years old and had pneumonia again. And I just didn't want to take antibiotics. I just didn't feel good when I took antibiotics, even though I know they absolutely saved my life. So I went into a used bookstore in Chico, California, where I grew up, and found this aromatherapy section. And in that section, there was a book by Jean Valnet called Practice of Aromatherapy, which is a traditional French medical aromatherapy book. And it was obviously written in English. And I opened the book and I looked up lavender. I just felt very drawn. It was more intuitive than anything. And I absolutely didn't know anything about intuition at that time in my life. But I went with it and I looked up lavender and I looked up pneumonia. Apologies. I looked up pneumonia, wondering what this book was all about and if there's anything that I could find out about my own personal health condition. And it said lavender. It said other essential oils as well for pneumonia. And I remember that moment of just this aha moment of saying, why don't I know any of this? Why is this a secret? If this can cure me, why is this not talked about all the time? And so I bought the book. It was $6. And I went to the co-op. Very first time I went to a natural food store in my life, and I bought lavender, which was the Oracacia brand. Of course, that was the only one really out there. And this was 1999, maybe 2000. And I bought it and I didn't know how to take it. It was, the connection with essential oils and external for internal wasn't in my mind at that point. I didn't understand about transdermal, herbs or things getting into your body through your skin. It was a very foreign idea to me. So I actually took it internally. I put a couple drops in my water and I drank it, and my pneumonia was cured in 2 weeks. And that was a very profound experience for me growing up with lung conditions my whole life. And I felt stronger after using essential oils. And that was also the difference, is that when I took antibiotics, sure, it got my bronchitis or pneumonia away and it took care of it and it healed me. But I always felt pretty weak afterwards. And I remember that distinct shift and distinct change of how I felt when, after I took, lavender for a couple of weeks, I felt strong. I felt like my immune system really did something on its own. But as we know with herbs and essential oils and other nutraceuticals, is that they really encourage your immune system to get up and going. They push it to a certain place. They either irritate the immune system or tone the immune system or tone an organ tissue or nourish a certain organ tissue with minerals or vitamins or turn on an anti-inflammatory pathway. It's ways that works with the body, right? Instead of basically tweaking it or pushing it in a direction where it's not naturally going. Like antibiotics, again, save lives all day long. They're amazing. It's just taking over your body's ability to do it itself, right? And so that was the huge transition for me. And then I just self-studied. I dove into the world of herbal medicine and mostly essential oils at first. And I wanted to have my own distillery. And I went into that self-study and read every book I could on essential oils. And then I went into foods as healing, and then I went into herbalism, and then I went to a formal education of clinical herbal medicine based out of the British system in 2005 and 2006. After working actually in my first herbal apothecary when I was 21 in Seattle. So I've been doing this, I'm 42 next month. So I've been doing this for just over 20 years now. And I just keep finding it completely fascinating and so much to learn. Like I know so little about this world. So I'm happy to be continuously inspired by it.
That's such a beautiful story. And what I find so, I guess, in a way, it feels so accessible to hear your personal background, because I think that, I'm very fortunate to have grown up in a household where my mom was all about like the macrobiotic foods, like foods as healing. Herbs weren't really part of what we talked about. But I think the vast majority of people grow up in environments where antibiotics and Western medicine typically, like that's the only option. And I, of course, by the way, full transparency, right now, I actually am on antibiotics because I needed to take them. And I'm, even though I'm studying Chinese medicine, I'm a full proponent of Western medicine. I think it's so necessary and it's just advanced our lifespan in so many ways. But it's kind of sad to see how disconnected we've gotten from all of these other ways of healing. And so I think it's amazing that, you grew up in the household of like Pepsi and Advil, and then you've transitioned to really finding your path. So I'm curious, what kind of herbalism do you practice? Because I know, and maybe you can kind of share with us, what are the different types of herbal studies and what do you practice personally?
I practice Western clinical herbal medicine. So what that is, it's based out of the European system. So one of my main teachers is named David Hoffman. He wrote the book Medical Herbalism. And I love science. I love finding out the chemical constituents and molecular structures of these plants. I find there's a lot of magic there. And it does blend the world of modern research and traditional wisdom so beautifully in Western herbalism, because we're like, cool, this has been used for 1,000 years this way. What kind of research can we back that up now, right? And do we need research to back it up? No, not necessarily. We see the interactions that it's having with our clients, with people using it, they get better. And that's the only information we actually really need. But why are they getting better? And can we use this in other ways? And that's really what modern research is doing, is backing up this historical use and then maybe adding additional uses as well, or understanding drug-herb interactions, which is really important. So Western herbalism is based out of the British system and it's European based. So then it came over to the United States in the 60s and 70s with Rosemary Gladstar and really kind of populated what people understood as Western herbalism today. Now we're really moving into this idea of North American herbalism, which is really that blend, that diaspora of so many traditions and cultures of healing that come into the United States or into North America. And we see TCM, which is traditional Chinese medicine, we see Ayurveda, we see indigenous medicine, flower essences, energetic medicine, spiritual medicine, all coming into this body of knowledge we call as North American herbalism that has the foundation in Western herbalism, which is really understanding the plants. I think the difference between Western herbalism and these other systems, so TCM is a system, Ayurveda is a system, and they understand the diagnostics really well. We understand the plants really well. We know how to grow them. We know where they're grown. We understand the different parts. We make the medicines out of them. We don't see that in Ayurveda and TCM at all, actually. So we go deep into the history of the plant. And then what we do with Verse, which is, I know we'll get into, is we help people go into their own ancestral medicines. And they focus on their tradition of their ancestry, supporting that well-being of cultural remembrance, which is really helping someone's individual well-being. But it also is very specific as on a scientific level to our DNA. This is the only way our ancestors have survived, is through these herbs and through these medicines for tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands in some cases. Our ancestors survived with herbal medicine and food. So our DNA understands these very well. If we can go into our ancestral medicine and find one or two very specific plants our ancestors used, we might find some very profound healing that we couldn't have found otherwise. With this ancestral medicine comes this modern research, which is that balance that we talked about earlier, which is really is like, cool, I'm going to find yarrow. Yarrow was used because I'm 100% European descent. Yarrow was used in the French Revolutionary War. It was used in the UK. It was used in the Roman Empire. That's what a lot, my background is basically the Roman Empire moving into England. I have a long history. I can trace back very far. And then basically the majority of my blood now line is Northern European, so British ancestry and Swedish ancestry, is that yarrow was used for as a styptic, as an antiviral, as an antimicrobial in times of need. And when I use yarrow, I feel amazing. Now it's going to work with every human being. As a Homo sapien, herbs work very similarly in each body. But even as you understand macrobiotics, like certain people cannot break down raw seaweed, right? Europeans cannot actually digest proteins out of raw seaweed. But Japanese and Asian descent people can. It's because they survived in order to do that, right? The people that survived the most were the ones that were able to break that down the best. And we didn't have to live on seaweed. We were living on other things in Europe, and we can break down root vegetables. And there's all these other ways that we've broken down protein. And so we do talk so deeply about ancestry. And that's the missing part, I think, in most other forms of herbalism. When it comes to the diagnostics and the clinical work, TCM does pulse and tongue diagnosis. Ayurveda also does pulse and tongue diagnosis. And Western herbalism, we do more constitutional. So there's 5 constitutions in what we call Western energetics, which is hot and cold, wet, dry, fast and slow. And so we call that the Western energetics. And so we really look, is this tissue any of those? And how are we balancing out those constituents in the plants and their constitution as a human being? And that symptom, if it's a cold cough, it'll be wet. If it's a wet, dry cough or wet, hot cough, we'll use some drying cold. So that's a way that we're utilizing a traditional diagnostic tool that you'll see in other systems in the Western herbal world. So I think that lays the basic foundation of how we're different or similar to other herbal traditions.
There's so much to get into there. I mean, that was such a great and clear explanation, at least at a high level. I'd love to take it a layer deeper if you're down to do that. And
Oh, I am.
yeah, and I'd love to actually use an example, maybe, because I think one of the things, and I'll just call this out, that really inspired this whole conversation, one of many things, is the fact that I feel like even for me studying Chinese medicine right now, plants still feel so like inaccessible. And it's sad that it feels so foreign, but I know I'm not alone in this, considering that I'm studying this and I feel this way. So how can we help people kind of break it down a little bit? So let's use a concrete example. Let's say I have eczema, which is a real condition. I do have it. How would Western herbalism approach diagnosing and treating that, especially since there are all different kinds of eczemas, right? There are the kinds that are wet and oozing, as you talked about. Sorry, everybody, I'll put a little kind of warning at the beginning. This might get graphic, but there's the dry kind, the red kind, the just, and there are like different stages. So how would Western herbalism think about treating that kind of a condition? If you could just walk us through your thought process.
Absolutely. First, we're going to not diagnose because we're not doctors and we can't diagnose.
Okay, good clarification.
Yeah. No, it's good because what Western herbalism is not is Western medicine. And so, and any tradition, right? And if we isolate it to a symptom, we're not actually doing our job as herbalists. So we're going to talk to you as a very complex creature, human being that has many other things going on, right? And so I'm actually going to treat you on a foundational constitutional basis first. And so I'm going to ask you questions. What did you eat for breakfast? What was your history as a child? What was going on for you? Was there any toxic overload exposure at some point? Chemicals? Were you growing up near a farm where there was, sprays of, pesticide sprays, or were you a mechanic and contacting some, solvents in an extreme way? I'm also going to find out, if you're vegan or vegetarian and if that would actually align with your ancestral foods or not. We're going to go into what inflammation is. And eczema can be autoimmune. Are we talking about an autoimmune thing, or are we looking at more of a dermatitis concern of eczema? When does it flare up? What does it connect it to your menstrual cycle? Is it connected to foods? Are you doing a food journal? And then we're going to go deeper into how it shows up, when it shows up. And then my goal, after about an hour and a half of a consultation, going through your entire history, we're going to probably give you something externally to put on the eczema just to reduce the actual symptomatic eczema. But then my goal would also to be give you something internal to focus on immune health. So if it is autoimmune, we're going to do our best to do immunoregulation herbs. And most of those with autoimmunity would be mushrooms, because they actually can bring down an overactive immune system if it's an autoimmune eczema. If it's not an autoimmune eczema, I'm worried about the detoxification pathways, which the skin is the largest organ in our body, on our body, and that's our largest detox organ. And so I am concerned about detoxification pathways. So I'm going to probably give you liver tonics as well as kidney tonics to support that detoxification, not coming out through your skin, but going through your necessary biotransformative pathways, which we call biotransformation, which basically there's multiple stages of biotransformation of how we detox. And it's going to ideally go through your digestive system and come out through, a bowel movement or urine instead of through your skin. So we're going to go through all of that to figure out what's going on with what we consider eczema in the allopathic Western medicine world. But we're going to look at all the ways eczema can show up in the body. And if it is an autoimmune thing and it's not connected to any detoxification pathway, we're going to help you reduce stress, increase your sleep, make sure you're nourished, and reducing that overactive immune system as much as possible.
All right. I'm coming in for a consult. I'm gonna table that, but I'm coming in for, that's amazing. I mean, the way that I feel when you're describing this is like, it just feels like a kind of bringing me back to a homeostasis, like really thinking about it holistically, because like we're not separate from our environment, we're connected to it. So kind of bringing that balance inside and out. It sounds so nourishing, truly.
That's right. I mean, the goal is you have to believe that there is a homeostasis. And I think every herbalist believes there is a homeostasis, which is your ground and foundation of what wellness feels like in the body and what it is. And a lot of my clients come to me because I do see some clients part-time. I'm very busy, so I don't see many clients, but I want to stay as a practitioner. What I found is a lot of people don't even know what health actually feels like deep, deep, deep health, where someone gets a cold and you're not worried about getting it because, you know you can fight it off. Or two, if you get it, it's not going to be that bad. And you aren't going to be laying out for a week, right? And of course, COVID exists and very healthy people got very sick. And this is a rogue virus coming through. But that foundation of health, waking up feeling rested, feeling strong, right? And this is where ancestral medicine comes in, is that your ancestors were warriors. They survived significantly more than what we're surviving now. And they still survived. And so making sure you have that connection with your ancestral medicines and ancestral foods, actually, I've seen build the highest amount of foundation, that strongest homeostasis in my clients as well as my students than I think they've ever felt. Because one, they're being nourished, deep nourishment with minerals and vitamins and nutrients from foods that they've always been nourished, or adding new minerals and vitamins and nutrients because they didn't know that they needed them or that they existed. And then the other thing is actually knowing when your immune system's about to go off, what your cycles of the season are, what your cycles of the day are, and getting in front of it and not allowing that burnout and that crash and those exhaustion pieces that are pretty standard. And I've seen that with people that are vegan, right? It's like the idealism is way stronger than the actual reality. And the only, in my experience, and of course, some people are going to comment on this, the only people I've seen being healthy, being vegan, as important as it is for climate change. Okay, that's a different conversation. But only people that have ancestors that are primarily around the equator have I ever seen veganism being a healthy, long-term, longevity, healthy option for them in really warm environments, that are slower, that are able to maintain and break down those proteins from a lot of plants and grains, and don't need as much vital nutrients and calories really on a daily basis to stay warm and to also maintain that bioavailability of protein. So my ancestors lived on reindeer 9 months out of the year. And so meat has been a huge value add for me. I was vegan for many years in my early 20s. I was probably the least healthy I've ever been in my life. And I did everything, I ate it all, and I took the vitamins and supplements, and I was so tired all the time. I was 20. I shouldn't have been tired, but I was tired all the time and sick. And eating salmon for the first time when I was like 23, it was like my brain literally vibrated. It was like, wah, 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 wah. And I was like, oh my God, I need this. I need this to live. And not everyone does in that way, but I truly believe that if you're not a healthy human being, you're not going to be out there and change the world like you want to.
I love this topic and I want to dive into it because, I have not heard it mentioned that frequently. Like maybe in passing, but the way that you're describing it right now, I just think is so fascinating because a lot of people don't talk about that, right? Like there's kind of a protocol for everybody, like, the autoimmune protocol or, I'm studying Chinese medicine, but like going all in on Chinese medicine. And I think it's a beautiful kind of practice. And it's both a practice and an art form, medicine and an art form. But there's something to be said about how your lineage and your ancestry influences how your own DNA and your own genes express themselves. So can you walk us through exactly what is kind of ancestral herbalism? How do you dig into that? And then maybe you can also start to tell us about verse and how you do it through the program there. I'm so curious.
Of course. What you're talking about is the thing I want to do when I grow up is traditional medicine preservation. So I actually have a nonprofit as well called Herbal Anthropology Project, which preserves and protects traditional medicine around the world with indigenous communities with intellectual property protection. So I started that when I was living in East Africa, and I was connected to a Maasai man who called himself an ethnobotanist, but he was really an herbalist. And we went on a safari with him, and he walked around and started talking about plants. And I was asking all the questions like, do you use this for pregnancy? How would you break this berry down? Would you boil it? Would you put it in fat? And he's like, why are you asking Mzungu, which means white person? Why are you asking me all these questions? And I'm like, well, I'm an herbalist. I want to know these things. And he goes, oh, I need to write down my medicines. Will you help me write them down? And as we know, with Indigenous communities, the majority of the information is only with oral transmission. It's only passed on through oral transmission because majority do not have a written language still. And so now there's been some like specific written words that they do phonetically more than anything. And they use either the English alphabet or whatever, common government language that they have, and they're able to write some stuff down or translate it into another language. And so I said, of course, I'll help you write it down. And the reason why I said, of course, so quickly, because I was living in the UK the year before, and it was 2011. We went up to the Arctic Circle, and my son was just under a year old. And this was my ex-husband, who was my husband at the time. And we flew up to the Arctic Circle in the middle of winter. And I have the Swedish heritage, and I really wanted to connect with the Sami heritage that I have, this Northern Swedish traditional indigenous Sami. And I met with this one Sami herbalist in Jokkmokk, Sweden. And she had very little written down of her traditional herbal medicine, like a pamphlet with like 10 herbs. And I was like, where is this? And she said, it's been lost. One generation gone, because her generation was Western educated, and they took them out of their teepees. I call them teepees. I forgot the actual traditional name. I apologize. But they look exactly like teepees that they live on in the Arctic Circle, and they're reindeer herders. And they use, traditional medicine from all over the Arctic. It's really beautiful. Cloudberries and angelica is actually their main plant that they use for sacred ceremony as well as for medicine. A lot of lung conditions, they use rhodiola and angelica. And I was so shocked because as a Western herbalist, I have volumes and volumes and volumes of herbals and Western herbals from the British system, German, a lot over Europe. But these are formal, educated botanists and herbalists writing these things down. This is the aristocrats that are writing these things down and being paid or just have money to be able to spend the time to learn about traditional medicine or to be able to write these things down. And it was the first time as a white woman, especially from the United States, was like, oh my God, I'm losing my traditional medicine. And of course, until things become personal, you don't really find out about the other struggles of other communities generally. And that was my journey, at least. And I was so shocked. I was like, I need to figure out how to do this to help basically get this back into a place where it can be documented. And then we moved to Tanzania the following year and spent time with Sayanga. So Sayanga, the herbalist, brought us on 4 safaris. Safari just means travel in Swahili. So 4 safaris with his village, and we wrote down all of his traditional medicine that he was willing to write down, but it was translated from Ma, which is the Maasai language, to Swahili to English in order for us to write it down. And so I came back to the States and had my second child and needed to start writing this down and realized that actually, because I was the one writing it down, that I owned all of the intellectual property, which I knew was completely wrong, but figured out this is how people do it. And so then I found, after some research, the traditional knowledge, folklore, and genetic resources section of the World Intellectual Property Organization based out of the UN. And in order to be accredited through them, you have to be a 501c3. So I started a nonprofit called Herbal Anthropology Project to be the 501c3, to be accredited with the UN, so I could get the intellectual property protection for the indigenous communities that I was working with. And so I finished that project and published the book and got the IP language for the Maasai in there, which is really the foundation of Indigenous rights. And so I was doing that full time. And that was the thing I was going to do when I grew up. But life happens and I needed to move back to San Francisco. And that's when I decided to purchase Scarlet Sage 7 years ago. And now HAP, or Herbal Anthropology Project, which we call HAP, is still running in the back, and some projects now post-COVID or post-middle of pandemic are starting to come up again in Brazil and a project with the Huichol in Mexico. But that is the foundation of ancestral medicine for me, and the impetus to be able to have each person that I connect with support them actually being part of the solution of maintaining this traditional wisdom with their own lineages. Because if we can have everyone, one person in each family, dig deep, look through some archaeology, look through anthropology, look through ethnobotany, find where their people were in the world, start digging up something even like an herb used in summer solstice traditions or in a soup, or even the African slave trade. They were putting seeds in their hair to bring over. What are those seeds? Why were those important? Why were those sacred if they were sacred? And there's this healing that happens because these stories have a story of resilience and a story of the ability to maintain something that's very important to us. And so there's the spiritual, very long-winded answer about why this is important and why actually Indigenous rights are individual rights, they're human rights. Everybody should be involved in Indigenous rights work on this planet because it's important for all of us and all of our ancestries. Through that process, I've seen more and more people start actually eating their ancestral foods, feeling better, getting connected to their ancestral medicine, writing things down, finding more connection with their ancestors, doing more work with those traditional lands, those traditional peoples. It's just this huge domino effect that seems to happen when people come into our community herbalist program through Verse, which is our first year program, and their one project they have to finish at the end of the year is an ancestral remedy. And it's tears. It's waterworks. We are all crying every single time. Every single time someone presents an ancestral medicine, they have to tell us the story of how they found that and their journey in the year of how they got there. And sometimes it is an actual family recipe. Sometimes it's them digging up a recipe they found through, once again, journals, archaeology, anthropology, ethnobotany, resources of people that have studied that part of the world and that they have somehow now adopted into their own lives.
That sounds so healing, truly. Because, as a society, we've become so globalized and we've just kind of dispersed all over the world that we, in a way, many people feel like a loss of roots, like this feeling of like being ungrounded, right? Like it's no wonder like we're always in our heads. I mean, most of us are on technology all of the time, right? We're spending a lot of time with technology separate from our families. My parents are Eastern European immigrants. And as I'm listening to you speak, I'm just like, I truly have no idea. I can't even, except for maybe some traditional Polish foods, I couldn't tell you what would be a plant that comes from Poland. Okay, wait, maybe that's untrue. I think daikon might come from Poland. I see you nodding your head. Maybe I'm right there, but isn't that completely shocking? Knowing that I know that my grandparents, my great grandparents must have leveraged herbs. And my mom even mentioned that we have some like long lost family that actually practices herbalism in Poland. But I know nothing about that. And I know I'm not alone. If I asked my fiance, his family's Dutch, like same story. It's crazy. I mean, that is just so beautiful. I think it really helps people kind of create roots into who they are.
Absolutely. And it reduces cultural appropriation, which we know does so much harm for people, unintentional harm. And I think it's truly unintentional most of the time, unless someone's actually educated about it and they continue to appropriate someone else's culture. But I think appropriation stems from, especially white people appropriating other cultures. It stems from this deep wound that I think a lot of white folks have, which is the loss of culture. And we want it so bad. We want it. There's something missing. We don't even know it's missing, but we're doing all these things to pull in white sage or, this form of spirituality, this form of healing. There's so much that we're grabbing. It's so easy to grab it when it's been maintained for so long. But the majority of white folks, it's been 300, 400, 500 years since a traditional medicine has ever been, quote unquote, used, even though they were used underground. They weren't written down or they weren't out in the public. And I think there was a time where a witch or a woman who was considered a witch was hanging from a tree every 80 feet or something. Like for 300 years, women were being hung as witches in many different parts of Europe. So we forget that we've been crushed. Traditional ways in Europe were being crushed significantly, and we are the colonizers. We're crushing others as settlers. And whether your ancestors were not or they were, white folks are considered colonizers everywhere we go. And so we have to decolonize ourselves, which is what are we missing here? Why are we wanting all of this so much? And we actually do have a tradition. We do have ancestry and we do have indigeneity. It's just really hard to find it. And we have to do the hard work to find it. And it might not be as in full tact as other things. It might not have a song and garments and whatever that other really kind of red carpet traditions have, like Native American traditions or Ayurveda or India. There's all of these that are continuously happening, but it's there. And I think it's really important for our generation to be able to unearth it and celebrate it and actually start bringing these traditions back into our everyday lives.
Beautifully said. And also, I have to recognize that I feel so inspired by hearing you speak about this because I think it also, you're approaching this widespread problem of appropriation in a really different way. And it feels like it's just very supportive as well. Like to take action, knowing like kind of where we're taking action from, being here in the United States in the Bay Area, I guess using your circumstances to propel everybody forward in this way, I just think is so beautiful. I just wanted to kind of call that out. I think it's very, very inspiring.
Thank you. It's an important piece for all of us. I think for me, this is my true belief, and I know not everyone is on this path, that we are all Homo sapiens. We all need the same things, which is love, trust, community, culture, right? We all need the same things. Why are some why are some of us more damaging than others to certain communities, and why is that? And as a very white person, I have to, instead of feeling white guilt, which I definitely feel quite often, but I feel less and less, it's like, why do I have this? What's important to me? And when I started looking deeper into ancestry and herbalism, I was that aha moment of, oh my God, this is not just my problem. This is not my wound. This is the wound.
Mm-hmm.
And the white wound is very real. And it's just like children being raised in, abusive households become abusers. It's like we all don't have this tradition. Like you said, you can't even think of one thing. You can't even think of one thing, one herb that your ancestors used. And yet, if you talk to someone, more than likely, who has an abuela in Mexico, they'll tell you about 4 or 5 the minute you talk to them. That thread of wisdom and tradition is so important. It's so important to everyone's well-being, whether they use it or not. And so I really enjoy sitting with people and having them explore this. And I think the first thing that comes up is, oh my God, but I don't even know where to start. Like you said, you don't even know where to start. And then walk through the process of like, it's okay, let's help you get through this, right? And then we go into the resources of doing it. And then there's this like body of knowledge that ends up just opening up. And I think what's exciting is like dill pickles is a Polish thing, right? And like dill is a traditional medicine, and you can grow dill and you can connect with dill, and they use it for digestion. And sometimes they use it in sacred ceremonies. And like you can go, and we take for granted these culinary spices are actually very important to cultures and actually very specific to parts of the world where they grow naturally. And we have it, we just don't recognize it often. And I think truly is that this world will be a safer, healthier, more peaceful place when people are all connected to their traditional ways.
I agree. So what is your vision for Verse? I know you just got accepted to New Chip Accelerator, right? Congratulations. What is your vision?
Oh, so much. So yeah, we started Land of Verse out of Scarlet Sage, the COVID pivot, we call it, which is moving from in-person classes to online, and realized there was this massive opportunity to bring my 20 plus years of experience in the natural medicine world with all of these teachers who really are the trusted voices who should be at the forefront of these conversations into a global stage. And that's where online really allows people to shine. We have students from Dubai, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, all over the United States, and looking to expand globally. So we started with just the certifications, moving on to the online platform, which is what we currently have. We have 3-year herbal medicine certification. So you become a clinical herbalist the 3rd year, all online. And then we've partnered with companies that are regenerative agriculture, which is the most sustainable form of agriculture, and B corporations. Ideally, most of them are B corporations, to provide products for our students to be learning at home. So you can still smell, taste, enjoy what it is like to be in an in-person herbal medicine classroom, which a lot of it is product. A lot of it is touching the herbs themselves, making the medicine yourself. So we've really figured out how to do that at home for people. And so it builds that continuity for building your own home apothecary, and then actually doing the online education with teachers that will teach you while you're at home. The next phase for us is really on-demand courses, which everyone wants to watch something at any time they want. And that's the masterclass style. And we've been able to beta test quite a bit through our Scarlet Sage community and our Verse community of what they want. And so that's the next phase of growth for us. And the New Chip Accelerator is going to help us fundraise for that.
So I have to ask, are you a solo founder?
I wasn't at first. I am a solo founder now. So my current herbal medicine director, her name's Kelsey Barrick, did come on as a co-founder. And what I found out through that process is that that wasn't the right fit for her or I, that we were co-founders together. So she stepped into the full-time herbal director role, which seems to work much better for all of us. And so I am a solo founder. I'm used to being a solo founder. This is my 5th company, but it's my first company getting investment and scaling at that level, which is a new journey for me, raising money and being in that investor world. The journey itself is a challenge, and it's a big growth for me, and I'm willing to take it on for sure. But I am a solo founder at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I find the story to be so inspiring. I think, just from what I know from my experience in the tech world, which was my prior life, it's definitely not easy being a solo founder, especially, and I'm going to just say, like, bringing to market something that is so foreign, where you're intersecting this ancient wisdom and this really, like, almost, I would say, slightly on the edge esoteric concept for many people. You're intersecting that with tech. What was the process of kind of bringing that to life to actually, get accepted into the accelerator, raise funding, and to be doing it alone? That's why I wanted to ask that question. Like, what has that whole process been like?
Yeah, it's been arduous, is to say the least. I never thought I would have any company having to do with tech. I'm not afraid of tech. I'm not allergic to tech, but I'm not necessarily what anyone would call a techie. So bringing this to an online platform for me.
By the way, I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to call out that probably makes you the best kind of founder, quite frankly. No, really, really. Especially people who are just like, all right, I'm not a techie. In a way, there are many concepts here that, kind of go contrary to being out there with plants and connecting to your heritage and nature. Like, those are almost like inward and natural things. So I think this is a great place to be. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's good. Thank you. I need as much support as I can get often. I'm not a tech person, as you said. And I live my life deeply on what I find my purpose to be aligned with. So my intuition is extremely important to me on how I live my life. And I've always been guided deeply by it. And so when this idea came to move online, it was a necessary shift just to basically not refund any of our students and to keep us going. Was like, oh, in 2 weeks, we need to put everybody on Zoom. Okay, let's do it. And then we decided to stay online through this year-long process, being on Zoom and figuring out what worked, what didn't. The reason why we stayed online is my intuition was very clear. Like, there's an opportunity here to do something different, to do something big. And a lot of herbalists or people in the natural world, people in healing, do not like being online. It is, in a way, they're allergic to it. And so I was like, competition is out there, sure, but there's an opportunity for us to touch people that other people are not actually interested in talking to. And so I do have tech people on my team, thankfully, and I'm excited about pushing this out into the world. The brand is very important to me, and the brand is more fashion focused. I love fashion, and the fashion focused piece of it is strategic because I believe herbalism is for everyone. I believe healing is for everyone. I believe wellness is for everyone. And the biggest way to shift culture is through the way things look. And fashion is the number one thing that can shift culture very quickly, including music and entertainment. And so we brought on our branding team, which are all fashion focused people, Everlane and American Apparel and high-end luxury fashion, and had them actually build the brand. From the initial round of funding, we had 5 angel investors come in, and we spent quite a bit of that, just under half of that, on the actually building the brand, the voice, the assets, all of the things of getting it out there. And then the pilots, we did 3 pilot programs through that initial funding. And then the rest of the funding has gone into our runway and building the team and really building those operations in order to onboard people from around the world, use 3 different tech platforms to communicate and build that online community and build those strategic partners with all of our brands that show up in the box at the beginning of the year. So that's our foundation. And the foundation of getting out there in the world and raising that money and being a solo founder is I'm in the student seat. And I haven't been in the student seat in quite a while. I'm used to running Scarlet Sage. I'm the only owner, and I've had over 100 employees the last 7 years, and I'm comfortable making big decisions. And yet leadership is still my number one spiritual practice in my life. It is so hard to lead other adults, but it's such an important practice to be able to get good at it. I'm different than being a mother, which I love being a mother of my 2 beautiful children. I love being a wife to my wife, and I have a puppy, and like that's an easy actual journey for me as being a mother and a wife in my home. But being a leader of other adults with other families and other stories is the biggest journey for me in my growth and in this life and on this planet. So that is the thing that I knew was needing to happen, is move into this new journey and move into the investment world. Now, in this world of raising money and with investors, there's been plenty of misogyny that I've experienced, especially because I'm a younger looking 40-something and blonde hair, blue-eyed, white skin. I find that I don't look like a founder people want to fund necessarily. And I've gotten that feedback a couple times of like ways to dress and how to look in order to be more accessible to investors. And so what I've realized is, and I'm not a tech person, that I don't have the alma maters people are used to seeing. I don't have the acronyms behind my name. I don't have the businesses behind my name. So my journey raising money is a more non-traditional way to be able to connect with people who are already interested in this world, who are deeply committed to health and wellness and deeply connected to spiritual practices. A lot of people in investing in psychedelics actually understand our world more than anything because they understand deep science and deep spirituality. And they're like, oh yeah, we totally get what you're doing, right? You're shifting culture, you're educating people on products, you're giving people access that they would normally not have access before. And these worlds are very, very, very deep and actually make a ton of money. I mean, the wellness industry, $1.5 trillion, like it's a ton of money behind what we do, and everything from spirituality to, physical wellness. So it's about finding those aligned investors that understand our world of CPG, understanding the world of ed tech, understanding the world of health and wellness, and to find all of them together. That's kind of the journey that we're on, is figuring out who those investors are and where they are.
I could keep going asking you questions about this because I think it's such an inspiring thing to witness a female founder, CEO, somebody with such an eclectic career behind her, now pushing like this new kind of pushing the boundary on this space in such a different way. And so I just want to say, keep going. It's amazing. I know so many people are going to be inspired hearing this. I'm inspired. Talk to you forever, but we do need to wrap it up because we are almost at time. So where can people find you, and what do you have that's really exciting that you want to share with the world? Of course, we're going to hyperlink everything in the show notes below, but just to kind of shout it out.
Yeah, thank you. It's been so nice to talk to you. They can find us at landofverse.com or scarletsage.com, Scarlet with 1 T. I'm on both of those channels. And we have a small Instagram with Verse. We're really waiting to push that out with our next launch of our on-demand courses. So you can sign up for a newsletter and you'll stay connected to all of our going-ons at Verse. And you can also, in that newsletter, there'll be downloadables and recipes that we give every time we send one. So Land of Verse only has 1 newsletter a month that goes out, and Scarlet Sage has 4. So if you really love newsletters, and you like recipes, and you like finding out where the planets are aligned, etc., hang out at Scarlet Sage. Those are great newsletters to get in your inbox. You can also find us at The Scarlet Sage on Instagram and Land of Verse on Instagram.
Amazing. Laura, it was such a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, I guess me and the audience, since it's just me right now, but thank you. This was such a beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much. So nice to chat with you, and hopefully we get to do this again soon.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Nourish. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. Reviews really help this podcast grow and reach a larger audience, and I'm so grateful for that. I publish new episodes twice a month, so hit the subscribe button to be notified. See you next time.